This session.
Yeah, we are on. Sorry, everybody. There's a nice truck.
It's a nice truck. It's a nice truck.
It makes a good rumble.
I really don't like it though that you're set up as in some way in opposition to essential work. That shouldn't be. We support essential work.
I don't know if that's really essential.
It shouldn't be set up. No, he's really good. Thank you. Thank you. What did he say? So are we on? Are we live?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello out in the rest of the world and yiddishsummer that is in Weimar at the moment. What, louder?
Loud, yeah, until he goes away.
All right, okay. Hello everybody, and welcome from the Green Laboratory in the Park of yiddishsummer, Weimar.
Hooray!
This is the second day of Meet the Artist session. Here in Weimar, it's 1 p.m. So I guess if you're tuned in from New York, it must be, what time? 7 o'clock in the morning. So, good morning. I have my coffee.
Hey, it's morning for us too.
It's morning for us too. Last night, there was a spectacular concert here of the yiddishsummer Weimar Wandering Stars Song Project. There it is. And today, we have 4 of the artists. I love how you're listening. You give this explanation, that's touching. We have 4 of the artists of the 6 in this project with us to do a Meet the Artist session. And the purpose of Meet the Artist is not to ask the usual questions about where were you born and how many brothers and sisters do you have, which is all very interesting, but it's really to ask, why does the art that you make sound the way that it does? How do you make artistic decisions? What interests you artistically? Why do you use this chord instead of that chord? Why do you not use chords at all sometimes? How do you decide that the first piece isn't going to have chords and the last one will? All of these kinds of basic decisions that, you know, we might think of in theater as the dramaturgy, like the dramatic structure of a theater evening. But an effective musical evening also has a musical dramaturgical structure, and that has to be found from the material. And when you have 6 people with 6 completely different backgrounds, you know, that can be a very interesting process, how you arrive at agreement about what it is that you're trying to do, as well as on the micro level.
Micro level.
I mean, I remember with Brave Old World, we used to spend a long time talking about one single chord and whether it was okay to have that chord on that note or not. So the range of the discussion about artistic decisions can go from everything from how do we phrase this moment all the way up to what the whole structure of the evening is. And so you should feel free to sample around anywhere in those in that realm that you feel you'd like to address. I'll ask you some questions. Let's start off by saying who it is that's here at the moment. Craig, could you join us just for this part for a sec?
Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just checking everything.
Okay, let's start with you, Sasha.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm not sure.
Did your parents give you a last name?
I'm Sasha Luria.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
brother or sister?
I don't have any brothers or sisters. I grew up in Riga. We had a dog. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
You're a vocalist?
I'm a vocalist.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a vocalist, and yeah, I've been doing vocal things for my whole life.
Okay. And
I'm Patrick Farrell, accordion player, mostly. And this project, I get to sing a little bit too, so now I'm a vocalist. And I'm from the United States originally and live in Alberta.
you're also an excellent pianist.
Well, thank you. That was,
And composer.
that was my first gig, was as a piano player.
Well, this is Bella.
He's not part of the project.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he doesn't show up on stage.
But he was there for all the rehearsals, like at least not the whole time, but like every day we rehearsed, he was around.
And he's
sang
definitely a vocalist.
Already. Okay. And next to him.
I'm his mother. That's the best joke. I'm Sveta Pondish, and I'm a singer. Lived in Berlin, born in Ukraine, lived some years in Israel, and today I live in Germany.
I don't think you have to direct anything to there.
To the world.
Wherever you want.
Yeah, I should mention that we have 8 or 10 or so, just about 1 million of people who are here live with us in this very interesting place. Maybe at some point we'll turn the camera around and show you, but we're sitting in a ruin. I'm not quite sure what was here before, but this part of it is a ruin, and Bauhaus University architecture students have turned this into a kind of a little experimental laboratory. So behind us, there's a very beautiful wooden structure, which is a nice contrast to all the stone. And we're just about a stone's throw away from a big green grassy area where the workshops are taking place. So this is kind of a little corner that we can come to have these sessions during the day. And actually, we've already been having sessions all morning, but we decided not to stream those because it will be too early in most places in the world.
Including here.
Including here. So this is the first streamed session of the day. And meanwhile, the person who is most responsible for the fact that we have a streaming program here this year is Craig Udelman, and he's also in this project. Maybe you'll say a word about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Craig Udelman. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, USA. I lived in New York and New Orleans. Yeah, I don't know, I've played klezmer for kind of a long time, I guess.
What instrument do you play?
I play fiddle.
And you're a vocalist.
Yeah, and I'm a vocalist. I'm a vocal instructor now.
He was very happy to be the vocal instructor. He was warming up every morning.
Yeah, I don't know. I played for a long time with the guy Zisel Slopovich in New York, in the band The Caucus, where we focus on Belarusian and Northern European Jewish music. So that's been great to dig into this material, which is really collected kind of there and south of there, but some of it there, and there's very few collections we have from the north, so it's really special to me. Yeah.
Good. Okay, so let me just ask, does everyone here by now know about the basic idea of this archival material, which is was collected in the Hansky expedition, and which we now refer to as the Kisselhoff-Makonovetsky digital manuscript project? Okay, very good. So
if you don't know about that, we're having a fantastic lecture today at 5 p.m. German time from Mila Sholokhova.
It's okay, Sholokhova.
Sholokhova,
You're fine.
right. Sorry, Mila, it's stupid Americans. But she's going to go through what was collected and when and how this whole archive came to be. So that'll be really special.
great. Yeah, so you can join us for that lecture to find out more about this. Yesterday, Christina Crowder talked about how the Klezmer Institute came into contact with this material, and also about how we here at Yiddish Summer Weimar got into contact with this material. And just to make the point for everybody out there as well, that what we're mostly doing here is putting together performable versions of the music. And the way that the music looks on the page is we have a photograph of the manuscript, which is handwritten and sometimes needs to be deciphered. And then we have a digitized version of it in a contemporary music program, which is much easier to read. But there are no chords and there's no arrangement or anything like that.
And there's errors everywhere.
There are a lot of
At
errors
every step
everywhere,
of the process.
right? Which we're very open about. I mean, it says so in the book. We made a little collection of this material for ourselves for the summer, so we have a common repertoire. And it says, you know, all of this is a work in progress, and we're right in the middle of correcting and editing this material, but we're sharing with everybody where we are at this moment, which is great. And so the primary work this summer has not been digitizing manuscripts or necessarily deciphering or writing or the language, but it has been bringing live musicians together to create performances based upon this music. And since the music itself is just a single melodic line, sometimes with text, then it's wide open what we might want to do with that, ranging from extremely traditional sounding material, a way of performing it, to something that could be very, very contemporary, adventurous, whatever that means, stylistically wide open. So let's start by saying, first of all, I'd like to ask you,
Vocalist.
the material that you found in the vocal material that you found in the archive, how much of that did you use in creating this program? Or let me put it the other way, what was the proportion or the percentage of that in your program?
100%.
Yeah.
Wow,
So there were some
Program.
instrumental tunes, but those also came from there.
amazing.
And there was like maybe like I wrote a niggin that was like incorporated
So,
into the
like,
arrangement. I think there was
0.1%
Yeah,
was Craig's
well-
original
Yeah,
composition.
also
I think you
though,
probably-
not all of it came from the written archive.
Right.
Some of it came from the recorded archive, because we have some recordings that are published by the Vernadsky Library of the cylinders that they recorded on the expeditions. And so some of our material came from recordings that aren't in the part of the written archive that we have. Because we don't have the whole thing.
Yeah, and the part that we don't have contains the biggest chunk of Yiddish song and other liturgic stuff.
And then some of that was like, okay, we know this song, like Estrella Shtetla,
Yeah, for instance.
like is one that is
In
in the Berigovsky. No, it's
no,
not
it's in
Berigovsky.
Lotte.
It's in the
It's in the
Lotte.
red Lotte.
So that was one where it was recorded, and we have the cylinder recording of it, but it's not the whole song. But we know what the rest of the song is from a published version by the.
Or we
Yeah.
like, so we used adjacent sources like those recordings that are published, but also like if we found something there, we also looked like, can we find the rest of like what it is? And sometimes like the recordings are how should I put it? Quite difficult to decipher because they're wax cylinders and they're played at different speeds and maybe not the original speed.
So it
And-
changes the pitch and the
and-
speed of the
And
recording.
there's like a lot of static noise and all of that. So we sometimes, and some are, and it's also like how they were digitized, I guess. So some are digitized in a way that like it's actually quite surprisingly clear. You can follow a lot, and some maybe are, I don't know, maybe they're recorded that way. It's hard to say. Are harder. So we use adjacent sources as like
Complement
Things-
sources, really.
yeah, like complementary sources, like the published Berigovsky's songbook that, you know, you can find a lot of stuff there that comes from the same expeditions. We found some things in the Lotte collection, like but also for, especially looking for the rest of the lyrics, because like in most of these, the manuscript we have is basically like first draft. It's not what went on to be published, and
Or would have.
or would
gone
have
on
gone to be published. So it was, so a lot of things are just kind of, look up there, or like scribble, like, this is this song, you know, go look. you know. So we found a lot of texts in the Ginsburg Marek collection that came out in 1901. So and they mostly collected in the same areas. So like if there is a song with 22 verses, the 21 of them comes from Ginsburg and Marek, more or less.
Why do you think that there was so much collecting activity going on of Jewish music in the first 20 years of the 20th century? Because I think many people in Germany, many people in the United States might think, well, Yiddish culture was threatened in the late 1930s and of course attacked in the 1940s. So then it would make sense that the Jewish world would jump up and say, hey, let's record this while we still have a chance. But we're talking about 40 years earlier than that. So what was the reason why there were these ethnographic expeditions going out and recording Jewish music? And it was mostly Jewish people on those expeditions that were going out and recording Jewish music and things like. What do you think? What motivated?
Well, I just want to say that on the 7th, Valer Dimshitz, amazing Russian scholar, is going to give a whole talk on exactly that. So maybe we should talk about it, but we don't need to go into crazy details.
Well, yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah. Just to put that out there.
I think it's a combination of different factors. On the side of Jewish population, it's the time of massive immigration to the United States and to Palestine and other parts of the world. It's the assimilation, it's the growth of the cities and pogroms at the very beginning of the 20th century. And this is on the one side. On the other side, musicians and ethnomusicologists got very interested in what's there in the folk music, and we don't see it only in the area of Jewish music, so Hungarian music, Romanian music. We have many examples where classical musicians
Across the board,
yeah,
everywhere.
they go to the sources, to the folk song in order to create something built on these traditions.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning in that context, since we're sitting here in Weimar, that the idea that there should be a connection between high culture and folk music culture comes from Weimar. Right?
Oh yeah.
That this very idea that kings and queens should be listening to music that has roots in the folk music of their own people. In the 18th century, that would have been considered an insult, right, to the aristocracy. But following the Grimm brothers, following Herder, following the beginning of basically German Romanticism, this becomes obvious to people all over the world, and it creates musical nationalism movements everywhere, to which this belongs as a phenomenon about 100 years later.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it goes even deeper than that, in that there wasn't a concept of folk music before that. And this idea that like the spirit of the folk is embodied in its language and its stories and its songs, like that wasn't an idea, you know. And we tend to think of like, oh, this is Jewish music, that's, you know, Polish music or whatever. It's like that didn't really exist much, and especially for the non-religious music, like, you know, because a lot of these people who are collecting this stuff, Ansky, Kislohoff, and I think others, were actually from around Vitebsk, Slovenia, or whatever region. You know, they came from the Pale settlement. They grew up, like a few of them had like a kind of a cheder, like a traditional, you know, Jewish school education. They were sometimes like, you know, involved with Hasidim or around these ideas. Generally, they then like went away from that and thought it was like, you know, sort of backwards and old-fashioned. Moved to Petersburg and became students of Rimsky-Korsakov and this whole St. Petersburg school, and this idea of like creating a new Soviet music, new Jewish music. And a lot of the collection, like if you read the writings, was really done with the idea that like this is the music of the people and we're gonna like collect it, and then the composers can take it and elevate it into these new forms, and that will help to give us, an idea of Jewish music. And it's weird because they came from there and they grew up around these traditions. But somehow they get to Petersburg and you have people like this writing like, you know, earlier, like the turn of the century, like, mean, there is no Jewish music, you know, or like there's no Jewish folk music. Like we have, you know, religious songs and like that tradition and nothing else. And like a lot of it's tied up in the idea of like what is real national music? Like is Yiddish a language? Is Yiddish music its own thing, or is it just this conglomerate of everything else?
Right. So it's quite interesting and very, very appropriate in many ways that we're performing this in front of the Herder Church.
Oh gosh, I
With
kept thinking
with
about it all
with
the
a statue
time.
of Herder there, because this is the person who
Oh,
articulates.
He did throw it to you, Alan. You were asking for it.
Well, it
Amazing.
took half an hour.
Bella, you ready? Well, you can something very interesting now. Yeah, because this idea is articulated by Herder, really, for the first time, and now here we are playing in front of the Herder Church, where he was actually a pastor of this church. That's why it's called that, and that statue is there.
Oh, that is why I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was a pastor in that church.
Oh, that's right.
You know, we're not just in a place like the United States where they would call it the Herder Church because in Germany there was this guy Herder, but because here in Weimar he was here as the pastor of that church. So
There
yeah,
is a Herder Platz in Riga as well.
that's
but-
in honor of Herder.
But he lived in
Oh,
Riga.
that's right, he lived in
He
Riga
lived in
too.
Riga for a while. He wasn't the pastor of the Dome Cathedral. It's right next to the Dome Cathedral. I think like that's kind of like an honorary place. But like no, like I think all the Weimar folks, like, and not only Weimar folks, like a lot of them somehow wound up in Riga at some point. So
Yeah.
I have like I
A
always
personal
feel a connection.
Well, it's one of the reasons, just to mention this, and then we're going to get back to the group, that many people have looked at this year's poster and thought that the fact that we see Liszt and Wagner and Herder and all these people there, that it's a joke. It's not a joke. It is, of course, kind of amusing to see them placed in this big pleasure music framework. But in fact, the Eastern European Yiddish culture that we're working with here was directly inspired by them and comes into view as a phenomenon for itself through their work. And of course, the work that was done in Yiddish culture eventually comes back to Western Europe, and especially in Berlin in the 20s, has a big effect on contemporary culture in Europe as well. So there's a real cyclical exchange that's going on there. And that's something that we're very interested in, because for a long time there was this idea, well, it was kind of common to hear in Germany in the 90s, well, my grandfather never listened. My grandfather was Jewish and he listened to Schubert. He never listened to pleasure music. So I don't know what all that Eastern European Jewish music is doing in Germany anyway. That has nothing to do with us. And we're trying to kind of show the different ways in which it does have something to do with German culture. But now let's come back to y'all. So you have your first meeting together, which is in Berlin. But before you have that first rehearsal, a lot of other work goes on, right? What happened before you got to the first rehearsal? Tell us about getting into the whole rehearsal process, what it was to set that up, and then what it was like when you met and started rehearsing. Maybe different people can take different pieces of that story.
Well, I think the first thing to do was to locate all the vocal material in the archive, in the written archive, right? Just to see where it was and what it was.
And where is
what
that
we had to
archive
work
now?
with.
That archive is, you're talking about the online version
The
of
online
it, right?
version.
Yeah. The photographs of the
Everything that PMDMP has.
Yeah. So, and a lot of that had already been done by a couple other people who were really interested in the liturgical music. So there was a spreadsheet online of all the liturgical music that they had
Gabriel.
found. Thank you, Gabriel and Bob Blacksmith. And so then we got in touch with them and said, hey, we want to piggyback on your work and do a second connected spreadsheet that is all the Nigunim and Yiddish songs. So that was the first thing to do. And so then I think I did that. I
You
just
did
like
that.
went through the entire catalog, all the notebooks.
It's a lot.
And yeah, it's a lot.
1,000.
1,400 pieces or something. But I didn't have to deal with the Makonovetsky stuff, because
Yeah.
there's nothing in there. I knew that.
Yeah.
So it's just the Kisselhoff stuff. And so go through and figure out, because there's a catalog that Moshe Barakovsky made of all that, where he gives the title. So you can look at that, but also he missed a lot of stuff.
Like for instance, things would be like call a song, then he kind of has it there. But like there's a lot of stuff actually. I think like there's still a lot of stuff that kind of like got barely made there because like because like it's called something else, but if you actually, or like you really need to like decipher the music, and then like we definitely had moments after that going like, oh, this is this very popular song that everybody knows,
Yeah.
you know, like.
There would be a melody about
And there would just be a
Or just a
melody, and
melody
it would be
without
just
the-
like a dance song or something
Yeah.
like that, dance tune. So that was step one, and then step two was to just go look at them all and start digitizing them so that we had what to work with.
What does digitizing mean for those who don't
For
know?
this is like just looking at finding the going to the manuscript and just making a one-to-one of the manuscript over to a digital music notation program.
Modern looking notes.
So like taking like a handwritten thing and making a typed version of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the philosophy is to try to keep exactly what's on the page, and if there's things you really feel like, you like make a note about it, so it's very clear, and someone else can go back and check the work.
Yeah.
And those, so like you said, there's also folders now. So if anybody wants to, you can go to the Klezmer Institute website, sign up for the project. You can download everything, and you can even then see these folders. So you can locate exactly.
That information is on our website, and anybody who wants to join the project is welcome to join. You don't have to qualify or take a test or anything, and you're not required to do anything either. All you're required is to sign up for it, give them your name, and then you get access to these materials, and you get access to the discussions about them. And it's an international community of people doing that. It's very, very exciting. So that was step
I
one.
feel like we actually kind of skipped step one,
Okay.
which was really Sasha conceiving of the project and deciding who to involve. I think that was kind of your.
Yeah, Alan and I.
You leaking?
I'm leaking.
Well, actually, then there's a step zero, if that's step one. And step zero is, okay, we're inviting the Klezmer Institute and the KMDMP to be our subject this year, but how do we go about handling that? Because we're going to start teaching these workshops without ever having played any of that music. What are we going to do? And it was actually Sasha who said, well, since the Other Music Academy is all about projects, let's make projects. So that each
I brought it on myself.
she brought it on herself. that each teaching faculty is actually a project band. Bye, Bella.
Right, Bella?
See you soon.
We're gonna go.
Bye, bye,
Well,
sweetie.
We'll be back in-
I really felt like it's really in spirit of Yiddish Summer Weimar. If we like look at the things that have been done here before, like these great projects like Jasper Redux and the other Europeans, and you know, like and other things that came out of it, it just felt like
It makes sense to do it. that way.
it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna come up like it was like, why don't we do the thing?
No,
that
but it
we've
was
done
inspired. I'm going to give her a little more credit than that, because we Yiddish Summer Weimar began before we had this idea of really project-oriented learning. And then that grew out of that, and it became the central idea of the Other Music Academy. But it was not quite so easy to do in everything in Yiddish Summer Weimar. And we're really trying to move more and more towards project-oriented learning and teaching and working. So it was actually when Sasha said, well, why don't we do a project? I thought, oh yeah, that's great opportunity. This is the perfect moment to start doing it that way. And maybe we can start switching how we work in Yiddish Summer Weimar to a more project orientation. We'll see in the future whether we can keep it up, but this was our kind of first shot at that this year. So there's a song project and there's an instrumental band project, which is playing tonight. So, okay, so you had that idea, and I said, I love that idea.
And
then it
I
was
got
like, so-
into a lot of, we had like, I would say about like a million calls. And we were trying to figure out like what's the best way to do this, and in a way like who are, I need to put this like so that it doesn't leak over all this beautiful wood. I'm sorry.
With whom we can do it, and if the person that we want to do it with can bring her baby with her.
And if the borders will be open so the Americans can come, and if the Brits will be able
If
to
the
come.
British will allow
and, like,
people out, and
it was
what's
really
going to
like-
happen with COVID by then.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
But also, like, even before like, we started thinking about like these kinds of limitations, there was like a thought. I personally had a strong feeling that, and I've been like, we've had a lot of these discussions about how to do this here because there is a space to do it here very differently from other Yiddish music events, just because of how Yiddish Summer is structured. I've been constantly, like, this has been kind of like my little banner that I try to carry here, and it's about what is just a general concept of how do we use voice as an instrument? How do singers create spaces where they can jam together? You know, like when a singer gets up at a jam session, it stops being a jam session, it becomes a performance where everybody accompanies the singer. So in a way it's jamming, but like really how do we get voice to be one of those communal instruments? But and in general, how do we use voice as an instrument, and how do we build something around that? So I really thought that it's a great opportunity to have a group of singers that can create or vocalists. I don't know, you called yourself a vocalist, like I don't know what you prefer.
Just the forgot boss.
You're not the fagot boss. No. That's a separate, that we need to explain this. It's a separate thing. But it's how do we use voices in this sense of making music together and not just constantly being a soloist? Because like and it's interesting because the people who are in this project who were thought of as vocalists, like primarily vocalists in this project, like everybody wound up singing, but like who are all, I think, primarily soloist singers, you know, like, but all of us really enjoy creating vocal arrangements and trying to sing together. So that was part of like conception of this whole thing. How do we, like, I honestly just wanted to create a thing that is just vocal based project with this kind of innovation that we can do here, you know.
I think I just want to amplify this for one moment. I haven't ever told you about this, but you'll find this interesting. I created an improvisation method, which is called present time composition. And part of that is to learn to think of yourself at any given moment in terms of what is your role in the entire group. And so there are exercises, and for example, an exercise is enter as a background. So how do I enter an ensemble, but without calling attention to myself? So I'm entering as part of an existing background. Can you imagine that? Like there's a foreground, I'm paying attention to the foreground, and then something in the background changes, and I might not even see that the background has changed. If it's successful, I haven't noticed that. And then I'll look later and say, oh, the background changed. Well, it turns out in hundreds of experiments of my doing this, that the voice is the one instrument that cannot sneak in the background. Well,
we've been trying
in a mixed ensemble, so far, in my experience of this, in a mixed ensemble where there's only one voice, the moment we hear a voice, everybody's like, it's a human voice. And
Yeah.
I think that is a deep biological instinct that has to do with that as human beings, we're differently tuned to the sense of a human voice. There's some other level of meaning that's coming from a voice, and it might be. And even if we find that it isn't, you know, if you're going, and I realize, okay, it's not interesting, I can look at something else. But at first, I'm going to pay attention to what's happening. The first moment is what's happening, what's coming from the voice. So that's a very, very interesting challenge.
Well, we did,
One of my thoughts going home with that was the immediate word ensemble.
Yes.
The immediate word, of course there were solos, but never a prima donna song. And everyone was serving the whole.
Yes.
I was so lucky having heard that.
That helps when you have several voices. And I was talking about the situation where we have one voice in a mixed ensemble.
But
No,
this
but
was
I think,
really,
like, that's
it was
the
like an
point.
important philosophy, I think, for us, also with constructing the project. I think Sasha was very clear, like, you know, often if you do have this kind of a project with a lot of singers, you know, sometimes it happens at these festivals in the Yiddish music world, but it's like, well, okay, this person does this solo, and then this person does this solo, you know, and like maybe at the end there's one song altogether or something. But like we really wanted to try to create something where we're all singing together and finding ways, traditional and less traditional, but mostly based on the tradition, to do this. I think just the spirit of everybody, also the fact that everybody respects each other so much, you know, and that they all have their different strengths, different kinds of repertoire they like to do, very different voices that they're like, you know, at home with, like, you know, these amazing singers just all really found a way to work together.
The Yiddish Crosby, Stills, Nash. Kind of.
No, but this was also part of the, like, when we were looking at what is around and how to find, like, and what was gonna happen, it was quite clear that we found, like, let's say we found that there are certain themes and topics that we can kind of like start building it around. So we kind of wanted to take it like as a journey through these like ideas and thoughts, and it actually like it shaped out quite naturally that way. And also we all know each other quite well at this point, and it was also quite clear that even if somebody was doing a solo, right, like, or leading and doing a lead, it still wasn't like, I just like this song so I want to sing it, you know, or something like that. It wasn't like, it was really part of, like, we thought of it as creating an arc there, and it was part of that arc. It wasn't just, you know, and here is a virtuosic vocal piece.
You created you created an hour-and-a-half long piece
I
that
think,
had different sections.
in-
Well,
I
that was-
think so.
That was quite an interesting part of the process, I think, that like, and like a classic to me example of how like collaboration should work. It's like Sasha had this idea, you know, put together the people, we looked at some of the material, Patty especially like digitized a lot and suggested some things. We all suggested a few things. You know, he definitely deserves a special mention.
Multiple special
And then
mentions.
Sasha had this idea, I don't really know why, I don't know if she knows why, that like maybe it would be cool to use kind of a rondo form, which is like, you know, something, a variation or another thing, and then you go back to this thing. So there's like a kind of a motif or a theme that comes throughout. And like originally we thought, oh, we'll try to find some prayer or niggin or some melody.
I'll tell you why. I was looking at what's the liturgic material there, and I saw that there were a couple of these prayers that, in especially like high holiday services, there are these prayers that come, that kind of like, it just like took me immediately to like being in a shul for Yom Kippur service, where there's like, it's really long and everybody is very hungry and dehydrated, and you know, and you kind of like, there are these moments in the whole service that kind of anchor you back, and like they so amazingly bring you to this energy of like being a group together. And even though I think like we let go of that form in the end.
Yes, totally. But it gave like, it's like, that's kind of what I mean, is like we had this idea, we worked with it, it got us to the point where we had the material, and then we actually left the original idea behind. But that sort of got us to a place where the structure started to make sense. You know, we kind of needed that just to feel like, okay, I think we have an idea of what we're doing.
But I don't, to be completely honest, I don't think we fully let go of it.
Not fully, but
You
it's
know
like
what
the original idea
happens?
was like, you know, here's like an opening piece. Here's 3 or 4 songs about like, you know, daily life. Here's 3, then there's the original piece again. Then here's 3 or 4 songs about sleep and dreaming. So we found these. Here's 3 or 4 songs about workers and, you know, or accidents. Here's 3 or 4 songs about love, and like throughout you would have this melody coming back. So we had that shape more or less, but we didn't have the melody coming back, and we didn't sort of force everything into like, it has to be these categories.
But I think the way we put it all together, the way like when, you know, like when, so basically we met in Berlin, and the very first day we just spent, well, so some of the things like were a little like came already with a little bit, like we had looked at material before, like we all had looked at the materials before we met, but like, so for some things, for instance, Polina had already created like a 4-part choral arrangement, but for some things we had like some thoughts of like maybe what harmonies we want to use, or whether it should be a solo or a group or something. But generally what we did, we spent the day just like together reading through this enormous chunk of music and kind of like going like, I feel this, oh, I don't quite feel, you know, like kind of like just getting a group feeling about this. And then we got to actually putting it together and arranging it. And when I saw like what were the pieces that kind of started shaping out, in a way, I know we didn't have a leitmotif the way that the rondo form would have, but we kind of had a shape that a rondo would have, because like because there's so many nigunim, and they are all like, and in a way I feel like they're all they're not the same, but they're related, and they're related in the form of like their material is related. You know what I mean?
Do you want to just explain what a niggin is real quick in case
A niggin is a traditional vocal tune. Could be with words, could be without words. Normally they're like, Bergovsky calls them Jewish wordless
Wordless.
Word.
Textless. Thank you. Textless napiewy, like sing tunes. Gesänge, sing tunes.
Actually, a lot of them do have, more of them don't.
And in his published book, there's a bunch of them with words. So it's a complicated, but they tend to they tend to fulfill certain spiritual roles, but also as a genre of vocal music, it's a very interesting genre because it belongs between vocal and instrumental music, because they are really, a lot of them are constructed as an instrumental tune, not necessarily as a song would be, but it's a primarily vocal genre. So it's really this interesting, like for a musician, I think it's a very interesting space between vocal and instrumental music. So the way different shapes and different arrangements of nigunim were going through the whole thing, to me, that was still in a way a rondo form that kind of like called on like, and remember we're still doing this thing as a.
I want to amplify on this issue that I think that Craig was just talking about and that you elaborated on a little bit, which I think is interesting for everybody to think about, which is that I think when you're in a creative place, there's a very interesting dialogue or dialectic going on between having an idea, and which gives you a form and gives you a structure, and then starting to work in it and finding that it wants to outgrow itself quickly, and then going with that, and then seeing what new structure is suggested by that, which then outgrows itself again. And actually, we see this all the time. We do this when we're talking. I'm doing it right this moment, but we're so used to it that we don't usually see that. But we really see it a lot is in team sports. I love watching team sports for that reason, because every time that a football team starts to do something, because see, they have worked something out, but of course it's the job of the other team to frustrate that. So it almost never happens the way that they wanted it to happen. If they know that, why do they even try? You could say, well, because if they don't try something, nothing's going to happen. But once they try, knowing that it's going to be frustrating, it's not going to happen the way they want, then they have to adjust to the new reality. And the new reality is, well, we could make this out of that, But then the other team comes and says, no, that too. And like the genius in all of this, and I think this is what's beautiful about composition and creative processes in general, is this having a structure which gives you a direction, and then, because you have to start somewhere, you can't just say it starts nowhere, right? You have an idea, and then that automatically leads to its own transcendence in something else. And you can have this structure, like your idea of the rondo structure, for example, can transform itself to a different level. Like, okay, first we thought it was going to be a melody, but it's not going to be a melody, it's going to be a tune type. But now it's not going to be a tune type, it's going to be just a kind of a genre or an atmosphere. Well, it's not going to be that anymore, it's going to be, so that's what I think you mean when you say that you did kind of keep the rondo structure, but not on the obvious level.
Yeah.
But on another level where it started, cooking on another level. Does that make sense to all of you, how that works?
Yeah, that's exactly like what I was putting together, we had all the pieces, and when I was putting that together, to me everything fell in place so naturally, exactly because like there was an original thing, and then like we moved on from it naturally, but we had everything to keep that, but we worked within that frame anyway.
Yeah. I think you can see that we could actually do this all day. And this is really typical of the kinds of conversations that we usually have when we're on tours, when we're not telling the latest jokes that we just heard. But what I'd like to ask is, we have about 12 more minutes left for this particular session. And I'd kind of like to open it up to all of you, if you have questions that you would like to, or to any of you who have something that you want to say at this point.
Well, I would have questions, but hopefully they have questions. But I just want to mention there was one or two from the internet I'd love to get to at some point.
Sure. Should we do that right now? Maybe that'll inspire us.
Unless anybody, maybe somebody out there has a burning question.
We're not burning.
Okay, do you want to read it? Should I read? Have there been more since? There was a good one at first, which I think is perfect for Sveta, and I think that we're so lucky to have here. Yeah. So Eric Rangel, our friend in Pennsylvania, asks, he says, as I look at the KMDMP cantorial melodies, I see Yiddish words, but the melodies were likely sung in Hebrew in the services. It would be interesting to understand the traditions of the time, when Yiddish was spoken and sung and when Hebrew was, which is, I think there's a lot behind there that Sveta Kunish is very qualified to answer.
Well, I think that Eric is probably referring to one particular tune, which is Kriyas Shema.
Yeah, we did that
yesterday. And it's a prayer which is said before going to bed. And the traditional prayer is in Hebrew, which was the language of a prayer, and it was the language of men. Please don't forget that women, Jewish women, at least in Eastern Europe, they didn't get the same religious education as men. They didn't necessarily know how to read Hebrew, and they weren't so familiar with the Jewish liturgy and with what is going on in the synagogue as men were. So women have their own prayer books. One of them is called Tzeneverene, and these are prayers translated into Yiddish, or some prayers which are not translated but originally in Yiddish. And this is a good example. Kriyas Shema is something you teach a child, something which a woman would say, but a man or a boy which is old enough and already started their education would say in Hebrew. And Hebrew used to be a language of prayer, right? It wasn't a spoken language, it was a language of the books, the prayer, the liturgy, but not Yiddish was living.
Right. And this prayer, I mean, it's the most central prayer in Judaism. Like, you're supposed to say when you wake up, when you go to sleep, before you die. Like, it's really like the prayer.
And also, it's incorporated in any prayer throughout the day, be it a weekday or Shabbos.
Is it a Shema?
Kriyas Shema. It was very funny. We actually we found it when we were doing all these online translation sessions through KMDMP, and we started reading it, and it was like really, it was all written down. Like, it was very hard to because it's like, read it through, and the handwriting and everything, and we just started getting through it and translating it, and it was just and it had the name. It said Kriyas Shema as the name, and we were exactly that way confused, and then we deciphered the text, and our friend Ruven, who's been a huge part of the whole, especially on the language side of the KMDMP project. I just did it. KMDMP. P stands for project. Sorry. He immediately was like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." So he immediately found 5 versions of the prayer and found which kind of Kriyas Shema that that Yiddish thing corresponded to it. So it was it's very interesting how like it just gives it goes in circles how this project that has been really crowdsourced, but it brought together incredible specialists with multiple intelligences. You know, like somebody maybe is a stronger music reader, but somebody is an expert on Yiddish, but they can't help you with the religious things or whatever. And it really brought this international community of people together. And then like we got it to be here where I feel like it's an important part of what other music is and Yiddish Summer is all about like bringing together these multiple intelligences.
That's exactly right. I'm happy you said that, because that's fundamental to the idea of the Other Music Academy. It's really even how we kind of define ourselves as saying that different societies tend to value certain intelligences over other ones. Like in our society, we value verbal intelligence very highly, and we value analytical intelligence very highly. We tend not to value emotional intelligence as highly. We don't value physical kinetic intelligence very, or we make sports for people who have that, and we say you're intelligent there, go do sports. But the idea of that everything that we do could be actually understood and enriched by bringing together all the different intelligences that there are, and I myself think that there are dozens of different intelligences that can help us to experience sides of reality that we otherwise aren't in touch with, and that our creativity depends upon being in touch with those things. I mean, I actually think that a lot of times when someone's having a crisis of meaning, it's because they are too much focused on one of those intelligences and not open to impulses that could be coming to them from elsewhere. That, I mean, a simple example of this is going swimming. And after you go swimming, you think, gee, I feel better, and somehow my head is free. Why? Because you just activated something that otherwise was underactivated, right?
Yes.
So I love it that this KMDMP, the project, and also this version of that is a great example of bringing together different kinds of intelligences in that way. And what comes about as a result of that is this phenomenal creative. I myself think that there has never been a Yiddish vocal project comparable to what these people did. I really mean that. I have never heard anything like that. I mean, so I have to say Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, which, to think of something where you have such great people who are cooperating in just the way that you said before, to create ensembles and something which has such a beautiful creative flow, absolutely phenomenal.
What I love so much about Yiddish song and klezmer music, and I'm sure that it's also relevant for many other music styles and musical worlds, is that you have to have a lot of knowledge of the culture and the world it's coming from. It's not enough to read the music. It's not enough to know the languages by itself huge. You have to really, really understand and kind of get lots of skills and dig in deeper. And I got into the whole religious Jewish world because I was missing this part of the puzzle. I'm like, okay, I am a singer of Yiddish song, and so many things I don't understand, and I will never be truly able to understand Yiddish song and the world it's coming from unless I really dive deep into the religion and understand what it's about.
I was going to ask you earlier, I thought of when Patty was here, of asking the question, like, this is not real, the numbers, but suppose I put in front of you, a Chopin ballade or something like that. A pianist plays that, and let's just, as a fictional number, say 50% of the music is what's on the page, and 50% is what the pianist has to know in order to be able to play the music well. So now let's look at your project. What percentage of the music is on the page, and what percentage of the music do you bring to it in order to be able to do it?
Depends on the song.
I think so.
Like also, I mean, there's some stuff like we didn't do this, but there's a Tchaikovsky there's Slavic folks like singing stuff. There's a Tatar song in this collection.
There's a Tatar song we really wanted to do.
Yeah.
Tatar song, it just
Didn't fit.
Alan, when you take a piece by Chopin, it's a great example. This is just the one time he played it this way.
Yes.
We are
Right,
very
especially
well
so.
aware that he was a great improviser and he would play differently each time. So yeah, I don't know how exactly to answer
Okay.
it.
No,
If
I
it
don't
doesn't make sense to
I
you, it
don't
doesn't
think
make sense.
it's just like it's a tough question because like it's tough to quantify it in that number because like it is the notes, but like we all like this is what Sveta was talking about. Like we all have to bring the amount of knowledge, and be it like the musical knowledge, the Jewish and Eastern European history knowledge, the emotional knowledge, the like or linguistic knowledge, or like even knowledge like where to look for like this kinds of things, like source, like all of the like. So we're like, how do you quantify that really?
Well, not to go too deep into this now, but I think it's interesting as a general artistic issue. Because, for example, in classical music in the 1950s, Western classical music, composers reached the point where they felt like what the interpreter brings to their music, the risk of their misinterpreting it is so high that they would rather have their music played by computers, because then it's exactly what they wanted. And that's like an extreme of saying the text, the written note, is the music, and you shouldn't add anything to it. But on the other side, there's the text is just the thread, and the music is everything you build around. If this doesn't make
We're
sense,
on that other
we're on
side.
that side.
I will
This is
say
a
we're on that
challenge,
side.
and the beauty of what we are doing all the time as singers and classical musicians. How do I stay true to the tradition and to the place this music is coming from, and at the same time get creative and make it my own?
Right.
On the one hand, and on the other hand, when you look at the manuscript, like because we're lucky to have a group of people who come with a lot of knowledge in different areas, we already know, okay, this is a mistake.
Right.
And this is not exactly how, and luckily we also have some recordings, so we can compare it and say like, yeah, that's not exactly, be it the dialect, be it the melody, be it the word.
Right.
But also,
This
like,
is, I just want to say that's what I meant when I was saying that there's mistakes everywhere along the way. It's not that the transcriptions that everyone's done as part of the KMDNP project are full of errors. Like, of course, there are some errors there. But much more, it's like the singers on the original thing, sometimes they might sing, not repeat a section that they often repeat. They might sing a note out of tune. They might say a word that's not in, the correct dialect, or they might not even, maybe they didn't say
or
the
the
dialect that they
transcriber
usually
makes
use.
a
The
mistake.
transcriber makes a mistake. There's questions like the cylinder is played at the wrong speed. Like everywhere along the way, there's these things that sort of are, can be like, we can't see that it's like, oh, this is written on the page, so it's just like that.
But we also embrace those mistakes.
Yeah,
sometimes,
we also
you
make
know?
mistakes in the
Like,
performance.
No, no, but like we corrected those things. But then Polina took that song, and knowing that singer probably just like lost their mode and went somewhere else, because she found a lot of other versions of that particular song, and they were all just minor. They didn't have those modal changes, and she consciously decided to keep it and like play with it.
To reharmonize it, to make
And
their
it's a
mistakes
source of
kind of make sense.
inspiration
Yeah,
for her
so-
musical decisions. But I also have to mention that when these recordings were made, the cylinders, they are, the singers and the instrumentalists who were recorded had to play for a very short time. So a lot of what we are doing, it's a little bit of detective work, and also like, okay, we allow ourselves this musical freedom. We don't really know how the other part of the song sounded. We just have the melody for the refrain. Okay, let's try and build the whole song based on just this.
Or like
Yesterday, I
there's-
was talking about archaeological work, the discovery of this much of a finger bone of a young girl in a cave in Siberia, from which archaeologists decided that there was an entire human species that they didn't know about before, called Denisov sapiens, I guess, based upon what they found of this much of a bone.
Yeah.
And I was saying yesterday in this discussion that this is the kind of work, this is the kind of knowledge we bring to tiny little fragments, and we create universes out of them, right? that's what we're doing too. Yeah.
Oh, just like another example, like there's like related to some stuff that I think Eric was asking about, and I saw in other posts. Like there's a prayer that we did, a version of, I think it was Hashkivenu. Yeah, I believe it is. Anyways, where it's like you have, because in the traditional service, like often the cantor would recite, you know, they would sing this beautiful version of some part of the text. Then everybody like prays at their own speed, just reading the words quietly to themselves. And then at the end, like the cantor maybe says the last line of the thing to signal, like, okay, let's all, like, we're here, we came back together, let's move on. You know, and this is how Jewish prayer generally worked in those times and often today. So we have a couple documents where it's like you have 3 lines of the prayer, and then a 4th line, which is actually from a different prayer altogether. And like what it is it's the next one. So it's like, you know, in this recording, the guy was a chazan, he was he led prayers, or about feelings maybe. So he just did what he does in the service, right? Which like, it doesn't really make sense if you think like, oh, this is a song or something, because it's not. It's actually 2 prayers, but it's what happens functionally. And so we took this, and at first we were like, well, okay, this last bit actually isn't part of this, so we won't do that. And then we thought, oh, if this is kind of like how this fits, how do we represent this on stage? Why don't we try this thing where when we get to the end, me and Patrick on the instruments we'll take the role of the praying and using some of these kind of melody. There's these like typical kind of melodies and modes that they use in prayer, and the singers will hold the chord, you know, sort of trying to flip the roles. And you know, so again, it's like first you have to have all this context to understand just what are you looking at, and then think, well, how do we represent this and turn it into actual music and not just like a historical recreation.
This is fun.
Yeah, that's where it gets fun.
Everything you mentioned, the process how we work on this project, it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I like a lot about that is that, you know, we sometimes think that making new Yiddish music means, well, how do we make it sound like jazz, or how do we make it sound like rock, or how do we, which is all legitimate ways of doing it too. But there are also these ways of like taking the material that we already have and that we know, and creating novel forms that grow out of that material itself. And I think it's wonderful that you know, we're doing all of that here. You have a question?
Yes, my personal way of listening and seeing has a little bit different question. Not that of the notes and what is not in the notes, but one of the reasons why I love to be here, and especially listen to you two, is your ability to represent what you sing completely. And that's what I'm looking for, being a theater director of singers. And so for me, the interesting question is whether we were able to incorporate all those elements and represent them.
What do you think? You saw the concert.
I think almost 100%.
We still have something to work on. This was the first show. After the fourth
It had
one,
some roughness here and there.
Yeah, we should mention, like, we made this whole project in, I think, 5 days of rehearsal, you know, less than, I don't know, 6 hours a day or something like this.
Yeah,
With the baby coming in and out, and everybody being, you know, jet lag coming from America.
being attacked by dogs. You know, we had
All sorts of
fun.
things. And then we had a week where we were teaching here 6 hours a day and doing different evening programs. We had 1 day off where we had a 6-hour rehearsal kind of in between.
8-hour
Yeah. And then the next day was this concert outside. So we feel, I think, quite good. I feel great about this concert, but also, like, yeah, it'll only get better, and the more we get rested and everything. But it's like, it's quite special also the way that this sort of, you know, and the teaching somehow also feeds the process from the making the project. You know,
This
so,
is what
like
I
Alan
felt
said, this whole
strongly.
project thing works together. And I just want to say, I think you both have a theater background to some extent, right?
We
Which
do
also-
have a little, both of us have a little bit of, a
and
little bit.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, people, I'm afraid we have to stop because we're over time,
Oh,
but it's 10 after. But this was a great session. We do have to stop, I'm sorry. I want to thank the 4 of you who were here for participating, and also just mention that Lauren and Paulina were not here. And they both are, you know, huge creative people. So maybe we'll have an opportunity to hear from them at another time. And thanks to everybody out there who was joining us online. And thank you again to Craig for pushing to make all of these online sessions happen. And thanks to Andreas Schmidtges, who's standing in the back there, who's the curator of Yiddish Summer Weimar,
Nice hat.
and works day and night to make it possible for us to have permits to be here and money to buy chairs and all of that kind of stuff. So here we are. This is the end of the session. Tomorrow we're going to be having this session with the band Halva. That's right, a very, very interesting band that combines Balkan music and Southern Eastern European music and Yiddish music, directed by Nicholas Koteny. They do a lot of original material. They'll be playing the concert. Tonight's concert is the instrumental band that you heard yesterday. We interviewed them, us, and I'll be in that concert as well tonight. So enjoy yourselves and have a good afternoon, and thanks to all of you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I just want to say for people, especially on the internet, but also you, if you have questions that we didn't get to, or you think of something, this thing is posted in our Stream YSW group, and it's on YouTube, so feel free to write things there, and we will try to monitor that,
and get to that.
and we can comment on it all. And do come at 5 o'clock to the lecture series, which is at the Volkshochschule, where we'll hear the whole story of this archive, and really, if you want to understand what we're talking about, that'll tell you who Bergovsky was, who Wamsky was, all these things.
But you know what we didn't talk about? I'm just gonna plant that seed into everybody's head. I think another interesting topic is how you dealt with instrumental music in comparison to how we dealt with our stuff. Like now, maybe like once we've heard both programs, it would be interesting to revisit that and see how our approaches are similar and how they're different. To me, that's a very interesting discussion.
And if someone here is a genius and can create a 25th hour in the day,
I'm
we
just-
will do it.
I'm just pointing it out that's an Andreas, that's your job, I think.
All right. All right.
We need more programming.
See you all later. More programming. Right. Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody.
One more, let's give them a little tour of the.
Oh, of course.
You know, like I'm not.
There's Patty
Let's
and
say-
Bela. There's that guy. Hello. There's the truck with the bar where you can get some wine. I didn't have a history. Here's this very cool building.
Definitely.
There is the tower thing. Here's Luca, our wonderful streaming assistant today. See you all later or tomorrow. Bye.
I really think so. You know, like.
Okay.